Welcome to the Advance Your Art podcast, where we talk about the journey from artist to entrepreneur and everything in between. You've worked hard to hone your craft. Now take it to the next level with tips, techniques, strategies, and routines used by successful artists to grow their businesses and careers. Now, let's get started and have some fun with your host, Yuri Cataldo.
How are you this evening? Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Yuri. Appreciate you having me on.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Thank you for joining me. So, I'd like to start off by asking how you describe yourself and what you do.
Well, I, generally speaking, because it usually depends upon to whom I'm speaking, but by and large, generally speaking, about my business and brand, I'm a branded lifestyle portrait photographer, and I serve speakers, authors, and coaches, and I help them create powerful and memorable image content that they can use in order to attract an audience and nurture an audience and develop an audience in a way that these images visually punctuate all of the stories and the sentiments and emotions that they convey in their content that they share with those they serve.
Wonderful. So that's very specific. What first made you interested in photography?
What first made me interested in photography? It was actually going way back to when I was in graduate school. This is, I believe it was 2004, and I was an MFA in television production student at Brooklyn College here in New York City, and I needed a class, and they had this 35 millimeter photography class available, and I figured, hey, I could do stuff with the video camera. What the hell is the difference between that and stills? And I'm like, this sounds like a layup for a class. It's my last semester. I don't want to put any pressure on myself. Let me do this. And it turned out when it was a darkroom class, black and white, 35 millimeter.
Oh, yeah.
It was the best class that I have ever taken in my entire life. And it was mind-blowing and game-changing. Except when I graduated, I pursued the TV stuff. But then as I graduated and got a job as a field producer working on a talk show here in New York, as the years went by, I started to feel a certain sense of something missing in my life. And basically the way that I kind of dealt with that frustration, that creative frustration, was to pick up the camera that I had in grad school and just walk around New York City and take street photography. And it all kind of started from there. And it's all downhill from there.
That's great. So let's back up a little bit. Television production, what made you want to study that in college?
I wanted to be, truthfully, I wanted to be in front of the camera. I wanted to be a sports announcer. I wanted to be the next Marv Albert, if you know who that is.
I do. Yeah.
I wanted to be Marv. I love, his personal life aside, his presence and the way that he called a game. He's a New Yorker. I just absolutely loved the whole idea. And then when I was a senior in college, I got an internship at HBO Sports. And the first thing that I did was steal copy from Real Sports with Brian Gumbel, which is a show that's still on the air, actually. This was in 2000.
Okay.
So back 19 years.
Yeah.
And I took copy from one of the Real Sports episodes, and I put it into the prompter at Hunter College is where I went, University of New York. I went to that for undergrad, and I put it in the prompter, and I practiced, and then I watched myself back, and I'm like, there's no way in hell I'm going to do this shit for real. I'm like, you know what? I think being behind the camera might be a better idea for me. Let me see what that's all about. And then that's when I decided to go to graduate school, because when I finished at Hunter, I didn't feel like I had enough of a background in what I was doing and didn't really know which way to go, because production is a gigantic field with a ton of different types of jobs.
Yeah.
So when I went to grad school, that's when it really started to develop, and that's when I started to really grow a real fondness for single camera production.
Okay.
And the reason why that's important is because single camera production mirrors what I do now with my portrait clients. And in fact, a lot of my style and a lot of the way that I shoot my photography is based on that development that started in graduate school, worked its way through my producing work, and now it manifests itself in the way that I shoot my stills. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of synergy. Even though it's two completely different roads, there's a lot of synergy, especially when you take into account the creative mind that's behind the thought of everything.
Yeah.
So that's where it all started.
Yeah, good. Well, so I commend you for being self-aware enough in college to realize that maybe what you were studying is maybe not what you were focused and should be doing. There are a lot of people who don't have that type of either feedback or self-awareness, who go down this path and then don't realize it until much later in life. So that's commendable. So tell me about your days as a field producer. So what was that like, and what was it about field producing that interested you?
It was a steady job, and it had a paycheck, and it had great health insurance, and I was in the cinematographer's union, which was pretty badass. And that to be completely honest with you, I'm half joking, because the reality is that version of myself, going back now 14 years when I started there at the Maury show with Maury Povich, I was in a place where I grew up in a family where they stressed stability, and they stressed, getting that paycheck and getting that insurance, and don't fool around with that stuff, and be safe and make the smart move and don't do anything hasty. And, that was why, and ironically, television is not a place where stability lives, unless if you're on the executive side, if you're in a different type of stuff. When you're on production side, you are at the mercy of the ratings. You're at the mercy of the interest of the host. You're at the mercy of the executives making decisions. And it's very cutthroat. I was very fortunate to be on a television show that is still on the air to this day, 21 years in its current incarnation. It's actually older than that, when Maury used to do the Donahue type stuff. But the point being is that I kind of lucked out. And but as far as the job was concerned, what interested me was at first the emotion, the capturing things where you can't fake it again. It happened. You have to be there, and you have to be in position. There's a rush to it, to be completely honest with you. It's pretty awesome when you're there when someone is breaking down and they're having a moment with their family member, and it's really something that I got a charge out of. And then progressively, as the years went by, that charge became an emotional toll, and it became very stressful, and it became traumatic, because at the end of the day, we're not talking to lottery winners here. Right. We're not talking to people that are living high on the hog. We're talking to people who have some real problems. They come from really crazy backgrounds. They're really crazy themselves. The level and diversity of personalities that I dealt with in that place has prepared me for absolutely anything that I could possibly handle in front of a camera. Absolutely can handle anyone or anything, because we also dealt with celebrities. I shot several celebrities, and I shot reality people, and then there's a lot of other people.
Right.
But so there was a lot of, and also really the other thing that I enjoyed about working as a field producer and doing that work was the ability to tell stories in an extremely fast-paced way, with a very fast turnaround. So you really have to be charged up, and you really have to be focused. and really pay attention to what you're doing and be able to churn out this content in less than a day in many cases. Mm-hmm. And sometimes fly to places and I would be on a red-eye back. A couple hours later, I'm in the studio. I'm with an editor. I'm producing an edit session. We're writing copy for Maury to say. It's just a lot of shit. It was a lot. And so it's exciting, and it also just at a certain point I hit the wall.
Yeah. So tell me about that point where you hit the wall, where you decided, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to switch and start using the photography skills that I had learned earlier to make a living.
Well, the switch happened when my mother died. The switch happened over the course of about 8 months. My mother died in December of 2013, and that really opened my eyes to a lot of things about life and more importantly, about myself and where I was with my life and taking stock in what I was doing. And the reality is that I was not satisfied. Creatively, I was not satisfied. And it's not an indictment on any show that I've worked on or any job that I've had. It's more of, well, this is what I was going after, and I'm responsible for my decisions. Therefore, this is ideal for other people. But for me, I was holding on for years. Mm-hmm. I was growing resentful of the fact that I felt trapped because I wasn't at the time brave enough to cut the cord and do what I did. So eventually what happened is I just took stock on where I was, and I couldn't do it anymore. And I quit. And then the next step was freaking out for about a year and not accomplishing jack shit other than freaking out and trying to self-regulate my emotions. And I had absolutely no skill in that whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And it was one of the harder times for me, aside from my mother and everything. I'm just saying professionally, it was I was very, very confused. I refer to the 2 years after I quit my job in August of 2014 as my creative crisis, because I was looking at every single photographer that came across my social, every photographer that I heard about through the communities that I was a part of. I could do that. Let me try that. Let me go here. Let me do this. Let me see if this works. And what really ended up happening is I was never satisfied, because ultimately what ended up happening was I turned within, because I had one specific client come to me who I knew through other means, and she was putting out a book, and she needed photos. She needed a cover for the book, a photo for the cover of the book, as well as social media to promote herself. And she turned to me and said, well, I need this stuff. What the hell am I going to do? And I said, I have no clue. I got to figure this one out, I guess. And what ended up happening is I tapped into all the TV stuff, tapped into the emotion stuff that I was familiar with, and then crafted this niche that I now have because of this one client. In fact, when I was shooting her, we're walking back from her apartment we were in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, and we were shooting in a park. And it was right across the street from her and her husband's studio. After we were done at the park, we're walking across the street heading back to the studio to wrap up. And I turned to her husband. I'm like, dude, I think I could do this for other people, man. This is pretty cool. And he's like, dude, I think you can.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I think I got an idea. I think we have a business. Literally, that's what happened. And that's where it happened, and that's why it happened. And it's one of my favorite stories, because it's how people spend so much time, hours, months, years, trying to figure out what it is that they do, what makes it unique. And I figured it out walking in passing, having a conversation with the camera in one hand, a gigantic light in another hand, sweating my ass off, walking across the street, and the epiphany happens.
Yeah.
Like, this is awesome. And that's what happened.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what I love about that story is, so first off, your stick-to-itiveness, and that you didn't just sit there and think in your apartment of like, what could I do? You went out and you did multiple things, and it was the process of doing things where you discovered where your true focus and your business lies, which I think is amazing, because a lot of people, they're like, okay, I'm going to think this through, and they turn inward and constantly have it stew and just sit there as opposed to have action, which is what you did, which is great. So could you then tell me more about how your business and your business plan has evolved since that day to what you're doing now?
A lot.